Welcome to It's a Woman's World, a show which discusses any and all topics under the sun from a woman's point of view. Our show believes that women should be treated with respect at all times and in all places. Here's today's moderator, Jamila Pettiford.
Hello and welcome to It's a Woman's World. Welcome back. I am your host, Jamila Pettiford, and I am with my co-hosts,
Barbara Deese, and I'm very excited to be here today. It's going to be a good interview.
Thank you, Barbara.
I am Ty Goodwin, and I can't wait to talk about these amazing photographs that we have before us today.
Yes.
And I'm Midge Bubani, and I am delighted to be here and talk to you about these great points in time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. And your name?
I'm Barbara Valleur, and I've been a photojournalist for over 55 years.
Photojournalism.
Yes.
Wonderful. Now, how did you get started in photojournalism?
Well, we could go all the way back to when I was about 15. I was at Battle Lake High School, where I graduated, and but I was a freshman in high school, just moved to the town, and there was a new used car dealership that opened up, and the prize was a 1937 Chevy. And guess who won?
Oh,
I won. And I immediately, since I didn't have a driver's license yet, sold it for $50 and bought a typewriter and became a photojournalist. That's the short story.
That's the short end of the story. And so you've always had an eye for different things.
I have. I was co-editor of my high school newspaper back in the day, and while I didn't take photographs then for that because it was a mimeographed newspaper, I soon went to Morehead State College, as it was called then, and I was the first person to major in mass communications at Morehead State. In fact, I helped set up the department as a student and even taught one of their beginning news writing classes. I retired 10 years ago, and I don't really call myself retired. I call myself refired.
Oh,
I love it.
And because I'm not a scrapbooker or a person who likes to do that kind of thing, but still love photography, I started self-publishing photo books so that mostly for myself and my family. For example, I did one about my grand dogs and gave it to my daughter for a Christmas present. There are a couple of places on the planet that I really, really love. One is 33, what's left of the original farm that belonged to my grandparents near Ashby, Minnesota, between Ashby and Battle Lake.
Okay.
And we have, my daughter and I now own what's left of that farm, 33 acres, the original farmhouse. And so I've done a book on that. And then I just came back earlier this month from Mallard Island in Rainy Lake. It's my second favorite place on the planet. And I've been there 10 times, and it is just a really spiritual place. I've taken thousands of photographs of that place. And it's a place for renewal. I was there on a one-week individual artist retreat.
Well, you talked about your favorite places. Yeah. What are your favorite topics or subjects that you photograph?
Throughout my career, I have focused mainly on people, but I also like structures, especially when I moved to Europe. When I was 30 years old, I moved to Europe and married and had 2 children. And I eventually, we ended up in Germany, where we lived for over 18 years. And I had an advantage, I think, of my colleagues. I was a full-time freelancer for 7 German newspapers. And I think that my advantage was that I saw, the Fachwerkhäuser, or the timbered houses. They wowed me, and I think that when we start talking about my individual photographs, you'll see a lot of repetitive patterns. I like balance. I like I like things in rows, and
So you're using those elements of art.
Those are things that when I actually focus on a subject, whether it's a person, a place, or a thing, that I think about when I'm framing that photograph, because I usually crop my photograph when I take it.
Yeah. So you've had a lot of art training as well, would you say, or just self-learned, or?
Well, I studied photography in college, and I'm very, very involved in the arts. I was on the Arts and Culture Commission in Edina for 6 years. I was chair of public art for several years, and and I belonged to several art galleries, both in the cities and also in rural Minnesota, where I'm from.
Well, Barbara, you're a woman after my own heart. So when I was about 7 or 8, they wanted me to get a bike for Christmas, and I turned that down so I could get a typewriter because I wanted to be a journalist, as well. So I'm curious though, what made you transition from stories from the written word into photo stories or photojournalism? How'd you get there?
Well, one of the things I love about photography is it does tell stories, and I certainly, as a photojournalist, that was my goal. It was to tell stories, mainly through one-time photographs. But when I worked, for example, my first job out of college was as editor of the newspaper in the U.S. Virgin Islands. That was a real interesting experience, I can tell you. But my next job was at the Wapton Breckenridge Daily News, and I was chief photographer there. And it's kind of cool. I'm proud to say that I was the only woman chief photographer. This is in the early 70s now.
Wow.
Of a daily newspaper in a geographical size of Western Europe, basically. Wow. There just weren't that many women chief photographers. And I had a lot of freedom to tell stories with more than one photograph. So I could do features, and I could have 3 to 5 maybe photographs telling a story with just a little text usually. So the transition from writing to photography isn't as great as you would think, because I do tell stories with my photographs. I think that there's a story in each one of, for example, of these photographs, if not more than one.
Well, they do say a picture's worth 1,000 words.
I would agree, and so that makes it a lot easier, don't you think?
Yeah.
Now that so many of us have cameras on our phones, we think we are taking photographs. What makes an outstanding photograph to you?
I'm so glad you asked that, because of course everyone who has a mobile phone or an iPhone think that they're photographers, and to a certain extent they are. However, that doesn't make them a professional photographer. It doesn't make them someone who can just automatically take award-winning photographs. I do have a couple of tips that I like to give people.
Please.
Whether you're using an iPhone or a Nikon, and I happen to be a Nikon snob, but no matter what kind of camera you're using, if you are taking a photograph, just for example, say the Eiffel Tower in Paris, and you have your loved one there, and normally people will put the loved one right at the base of the Eiffel Tower, go back about 100 feet and take a photograph. You have the Eiffel Tower, but the person ends up being this big. No. Bring that person forward, 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 forward. You only want really this much of a person. You don't need the whole body. Have them at just past arm's length. And then take the photograph. You've got the Eiffel Tower in the background, but you've got the person really close up. And I promise you, you'll be much happier with your photograph.
That's a really good
sense.
Yes,
for all of us selfie takers out there in the world.
Yes.
That is just great, Barbara.
Well, with a selfie, you are an arm's length
Yes.
away,
Yeah.
but particularly when you are taking pictures of other people.
Yes.
Yes.
Very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
That was
That's a
great.
great
I'm
tip.
gonna have to use that.
Yeah,
now,
please
now,
do.
Now, Barbara, you have done many things, and you've done many travels. What could you say sticks out to you the most, that when you pass on and you're the echo into time, what would you say would be what you would want someone to say, this is what Barbara captured, this is the feeling she gave all of us?
Wow. I think that I would like people to remember that I captured the essence of whatever it was that I was taking a photograph of. In terms of, not necessarily in terms of photography, but in terms of living in different cultures, Virgin Islands, Fargo, North Dakota, Germany, England. I think that living in different cultures and learning about different people really does make you a more interesting person. I think that you learn a lot more about the world around you, and we learn certainly how small it is. I always encourage people to travel, and I also encourage people to learn a new language. It's not easy, but I think that we could do well to encourage our children and our grandchildren to learn languages, Spanish, Chinese, French, Italian, whatever.
And just take pictures with your words.
Well,
in other languages.
It opens up so many opportunities.
It really does.
When you travel, there are opportunities that don't express themselves when you are confined to one geographical area.
Well, speaking of places that you've been, we've got 10 beautiful pictures that you have taken all around the world, different places. And so, if you don't mind, would you walk us through these 10 pictures that you have taken, and maybe some of the premise and the background? What did you see? And as we know, beauty is truly in the eyes of the beholder. Help us to see what you've seen. So let's start with picture number 1.
Yes, this is taken at La Farm, which is what we call our family farm between Ashby and Battle Lake. And this really does exemplify my like of balance, repetitive patterns. This particular one is rich in texture. It's an old shed. My 2 older sisters wanted to tear it down when we first bought the farm 25 years ago, and I said, over my dead body, no. And I've taken hundreds of pictures of this shed. This is my favorite. So
nice.
And the second one, which is I call Bleeding Hearts. That
Beautiful
is also
flowers.
taken at Mallard Island on Rainy Lake. Mallard Island is one of 4 review islands that are owned by the Ernst Oberholzer Foundation. And it is a place for artists to go and have a retreat. They have over 11,000 incredible books, many of which are first edition. And Ernst Oberholzer is worth looking up and reading about.
That sounds fantastic. Now, I want to ask you about about photo number 3, but I've got a question for you.
Yes.
So it sounds like you work for a lot of newspapers. What were some of your other favorite freelance projects that you got to do?
Wow. Well, when I had a stint as the communications coordinator at the University of Minnesota School of Nursing, and I did that on a part-time basis shortly after I came back from my 20 years in Europe. And I did the magazine. I turned their magazine into a colored production. I worked with the nurses and helped with the website and all of that. But one of the perks was that I was contacted by the International Nursing magazine, and I'm blanking on the name of it. It's been a long time ago. But they contacted me, and I did some freelance cover stories for them. So they flew me to Washington, D.C., where I interviewed Clara Adams Ender. And Clara Adams Ender is an amazing human being, and she went to the University of Minnesota School of Nursing, and she ended up being a brigadier general, African-American woman, also worth Googling. And she used to be the head of the Army Nurse Corps.
Wow.
And I was able to not only meet her, but stay in her home, photograph her, and write about her. And in fact, we became friends. And she even flew out for my wedding to my husband, Arnie Bigby, 16 years ago. So,
Wow, what a great story.
And then
What a
they flew
great
me to
story.
Nashville, Tennessee. There was a man who had been a nurse very early on, unusual for a male nurse. Christensen was his name, and then they flew me to La Jolla, California, to another nurse who has since passed on, but all of them had connections with the University of Minnesota. So that was kind of a fun freelance.
That sounds very fun. Well, picture number 3 looks like a lot of fun too. Can you talk a little bit about what are we seeing
Well, I
here?
can. Actually, this is a picture of Mendenhall Glacier outside of Juneau, Alaska. And when I turned 65, I decided to start doing my bucket list. I'm now 74. So 65, I went up in a hot air balloon. 66, I jumped out of an airplane at 14,000 feet. I do like adventure.
Not my bucket list.
The next year, we went on a cruise to Alaska, which I wanted to do for some time. And this stop in at Juneau, Alaska, allowed us to go and see the Mendenhall Glacier, and I was just struck by, first of all, its massiveness, but also the subtle colors. Very, very blue, grays, some blacks, and then of course the. It's not a boat. It's not a canoe. I don't remember what it's called.
Kayak?
Well, something like that. Anyway, I recently, a year or so ago, saw a woman who had just been to this same spot, and she said the glacier has melted so much it's about half that size. So that was heartbreaking to hear.
Yes.
But again, in this photograph, as in the Bleeding Hearts and the other one, you see repetitive patterns.
Yeah,
you do.
I'm noticing, too, the framework, how you have something that's in the center of some of these. So what's happening in number 4?
That is a photograph of a beautiful sculpture in Edina, right at Centennial Lakes, in one foggy morning, and it's just off of center because you don't actually want to have something right in the center. But if you fold the photograph, it'll be just off.
I can see that.
And that's another tip for photographers, by the way.
Thank you.
Okay.
And yes, I have been, as I mentioned, very involved in public art, and this is one of my favorite sculptures in Edina. I really like it.
Nice.
Nice.
And the number 5 is one of my favorites here.
It reflects my involvement, perhaps, in politics. One of my my very first photograph of a famous person was way back when I had just graduated from high school. I was out in Southern California with my grandparents, and I took a photograph of John F. Kennedy with an Instamatic camera. He is about this big in the photograph, but the photograph itself was kind of funny because I went under a rope, and then I had this man rushing to me saying, "Hey lady, you're in the press box." And I said, "Well, just a minute, I have to just take a couple of more pictures." And so even as a 17, 18-year-old, I was pretty stubborn.
Aggressive to get those shots.
Bold.
Bold. I would like to say bold.
Absolutely.
Didn't take no for an answer. So, and this this photograph spells out the word vote, and I took it right before the election in 2016. It just the idea came to me, and I'm friends with one of the young women, all of whom are dancers, and they had just graduated from college, majoring in dance. And I said, do you think that you could do this? You know, let's try and figure out a way to do this. So we went over to, again, Centennial Lakes, where there's that amphitheater. And it took a while because the two that formed the V, they had to actually let go of, and I had to shoot several times to get them far enough apart.
I was wondering
before
how
they
they
Me
did
too.
that.
They're doing the Michael Jackson.
Because they did fall.
Lean back.
No, they did fall back.
Oh, they did fall back.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
yes.
There's nothing
And,
holding them up. They're just, okay.
Anyway, I sent it in, and it was published in the Edina Sun Current. I didn't get paid for it, but it's okay.
Well, their
I thought it was pretty cool.
their flexibility is absolutely amazing.
Yes, I mean, yeah.
That O.
Yes, the O is serious.
Well, and the E.
And the E.
And the E.
Yeah, nice.
Goodness.
Now, you mentioned your Instamatic. When we went digital, how did that change your craft?
Well, it made it a lot simpler, I can tell you that. When I lived in Germany and worked for 7 German newspapers, I sometimes had 15 to 20 assignments in one evening, one period of like 4 or 5 hours. And this wasn't just in one location. I covered the Bergstrasse, which is a geographical area of several kilometers, and I ran from village to village to village taking photographs. And remember, I did speak German. I'm still fluent in German, but my writing was not, and my grammar wasn't accurate. So I'd have to make sure I got the spelling of the names of people accurately, and so it was a little bit of a challenge, but I did well. Evidently.
And before digital, did you have your own dark room?
Yes, yes. I did have my darkroom there, and it took me, with 19 assignments, it took me hours to develop my film and then print. Today, I could have done those 19 assignments in probably 2 hours and delivered the goods, as opposed to 8 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it did make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
And the other thing about it is that you can see immediately with a digital whether all the eyes are open or whether you've got something sticking out of someone's head, which you don't want. So it's easier in that way as well.
Do you ever do photo editing after the fact?
You know, I actually do very, very little. I don't have a photo editing app or program because as a photojournalist, what you see is what you get.
That's right.
And I know that that's not necessarily the case with probably 95% of even modern day photojournalists. I'm sure that they do edit, but I just don't. You know.
And like in picture number 6, I mean, you really captured both areas very nicely. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, my husband's daughter and our grandson lives in the Washington, D.C. area, so I love going there. And this was my first time seeing the memorial for Martin Luther King, and it is really moving. It's every bit as moving as the Vietnam War Memorial. Both of them are just incredible pieces of public art, but also history now.
Yes.
And I tried to, I mean, there are many angles. I took many photographs of it. This is one of my favorite because I like that. I like that Washington Monument in the background.
That's what I liked.
And the color of the
Shrubs
flowers gives it a little time element as well in terms of the time of the year.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Just beautiful.
Now, is this number 7, is that from your Hola Cuba.
It is. It is. And I've done a couple of photo books on Cuba, and so this is one of my larger format books. But yes, this is a picture of a highly modified 1928 Model A Ford.
Wow.
And it's still a functioning taxi in Havana. So I took a series of photographs of the American cars, and the car series. So I have shown my Cuba photographs. In fact, they're currently showing at the Cubano Gallery in Golden Valley. But I have those photographs on canvas, and something like the first one, which is of the farm shed. I have that on canvas too. It just lends itself to canvas for some reason. And I love the fact that the taxi driver is sticking his head out the window. I mean, that's in making a really interesting photograph, you want to have one thing that sticks out. So I try to do that. Well, I had no control over this taxi driver sticking his head out, but it certainly made the difference for me.
Well, in number 8, you've got something sticking out. Sure.
Several things.
Yes, and isn't this, this is an interesting photograph, I think, too, because I was in Barcelona, Spain. My daughter happens to live there, so I was there a year and a half ago. And I was with some family members, and we were about to have dinner. And so I walked down towards the water, because I love water. I always want to eat with a water view if I can.
Yeah.
And I turned around and I looked up, and there were these 3 guys standing on a bridge, and it was just like, and then the bird flew. I mean, that was just like a perk.
And the guy looks like he has a little mask on or something.
Yeah, they were in mime character. All 3 of them. Yeah.
Wow.
Interesting.
So you really captured that. You saw that and said, "Hey, I'm going to capture
Yes.
that." Wow, that is beautiful, Barbara. And now 9. What's going on in picture 9 here?
Number 9 is called, and I'll say the German first, it's called Aus dem Rahmen gefallen. And what that means is falling out of the frame. And there's a double meaning for that term in German. One means literally falling out of the frame.
Okay.
And that's what's happening in this photograph. But also it means something a little bit unusual or something a little bit different. And when I had my first photo show in Germany, all black and white photographs, of course, this was my title photograph for the posters. And yes, I really like this. In fact, this is hanging in my living room, as is the picture from Barcelona and the shed. Quickly, Ashby, my hometown of Ashby has probably the most amazing Memorial Day service every year. And I've been going since I was in first grade, because the first graders say their pieces and sing songs, and they're a highlight of the program. But then you walk down Main Street of Ashby, and you walk to the cemetery, and there is a service there with flags presented to the family of people who had passed that year. And I wanted to take a picture that would symbolize this incredible event.
Beautiful.
And it is no faces.
No faces, I
and
could see,
that's
yeah.
very much on purpose, because I wanted it to be every person.
Well, you know what? This conversation has been just a blessing, and it has just truly been good. I've learned so much. I know now how I'm going to take my picture when I go to the Eiffel Tower. And I want to thank you, Barbara, for taking us on this journey.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for staying with us on this journey. And please come back and visit us again with It's a Woman's World.